via Zoom. This is our first year doing endorsements, so we appreciate you participating. What you have in the room is FinPAC, GPAC, and NAACP. FinPAC, GPAC, they do endorsements as either you or your opponent. GPAC, NAACP will rate you, period. Not you versus him, but they just rate you as a judicial candidate, period. Anybody who has any engagement in any of the races, they recuse themselves. If you can't be unbiased, this is not the place for you. We're not here to rubber stamp an ethnicity, although we are concerned about your involvement in the Black community, period. Let's see, what else can I share with you? There'll only be one person talking, asking you the questions. He asks the exact same questions of every single candidate for court of common pleas, period. Then at the end, NAACP will do their thing, we'll do our thing. When you see me do like this, that means because you've been talking for, or you've been going on for like 15 minutes, and then that means there's 2 minutes before we end. So be mindful, because the more questions we ask, the more we can delve deep. If you take 15 minutes on one question, we're only going to be able to rate it based on one question. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
You have any questions, Judge?
No, ready to roll.
All right, so I am going to mute myself, and Bishop Ward, take it away.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much. Judge Calabrese, how are you today?
Good, thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well too.
All is well, all is well. We're going to give you a few questions. Could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself? Give us some background about you.
Sure, and I'll be mindful of the not taking too much time on that, but I grew up here in Cleveland. My mom was a nurse. My dad was both a teacher and then worked for Bishop Pilla. You may remember the Church in the City initiative. My father worked closely with Bishop on that, as well as spending his time in the Social Action Office for the Diocese of Cleveland. So I grew up here, St. Ignatius High School, went away to college, thinking I would never come back, but here I am. Went to Holy Cross for college, took time off after college before going to law school. During that time, I worked out and lived elsewhere. Went to Harvard for law school, and then moved back to Cleveland and have practiced law for nearly 2 decades before taking the bench last year.
Okay. How will you help right the wrongs of a flawed criminal justice system that has preyed upon poor people and minorities?
Well, that's a big question. Obviously, a big part of the reason I wanted to do what I'm doing now, which involved taking the education that I've received, the experience as a lawyer, was that I saw over time in my practice that the justice system, civil and criminal, it has tremendous deep shortcomings. And I found myself for many years thinking that I either had to learn to live with those frustrations or try to change them. And so this is the choice that I've made. And fundamentally, I think the system too often, again, civil and criminal, does not give parties in cases an opportunity to tell their stories and truly to be heard, to have their day in court. So that's what I try to do. Specifically, we can talk about the civil side or the criminal side. I think there's a lot of different things that go into that. On the criminal side, I think a lot of the problems with lengthy criminal sentences are well known, they're well documented. I think a lot of issues in the criminal justice system are on full display today. I try at bottom to give everybody an opportunity to tell their story, to have their day in court, to be heard as a person. Every case is different, not to reflexively dismiss anyone who try to understand where they're coming from on any particular case or fact pattern. And the other thing I would simply add is that in the criminal justice system in particular, we saw this in the Ferguson report out of the Department of Justice a number of years ago. Too often the criminal justice system, in my view, defaults toward fines and financial penalties and sanctions that recreate in many ways a modern debtor's prison, and that's not the intent. So I try to be very mindful of that in criminal cases as well.
You're on the bench already. What new or different perspective have you brought to the court since you've been there?
Well, in both civil cases and criminal cases, I've been trying to do a lot of things differently. I'll just give you two examples, one from the civil world and one from the criminal world. With my civil docket, I work that docket with my staff attorney. A lot of my colleagues have their staff attorney run it and are only involved on the margins. I'm intimately involved on the cases. I meet with the parties regularly. On dispositive motions, I generally, again, every case is different, so I don't always, but I generally have oral arguments on the record that give me an opportunity to hear from the parties, and it gives them that opportunity I was talking about, to have their day in court and to tell their story. And then I issue a written ruling, again, almost all the time. I do it very quickly, and just tell people what I'm doing and why. You know, as one example, I have one case on my docket coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic where a healthcare worker alleges that she was terminated because she wanted to work from home and her employer would not allow her to do that. That case has been pending about a month. I've already written an opinion on that case. It was probably 12 or 15 pages long to deal with some of the threshold legal questions in that case. On the criminal side, again, just one example, before the pandemic, I have not been requiring defendants charged with crimes who are not detained while awaiting trial. They are out in the community. I have not been requiring them to appear personally at every pretrial conference in my courtroom. And I was doing that because I think generally it's an incredible inconvenience for people to come downtown. They have to take time off of work. It's financially costly. Not only do you miss the time at work, you have to park, you have to find childcare, things like that. It can be incredibly disruptive. And if you're not detained while awaiting trial, while you're presumed innocent, you should be about the business of doing the things we as society want you to do, providing for your kids, your family, et cetera. Certainly, if defendants want to come, they're entitled to. It's a very important case for them, and they're entitled to, but I'm not, unlike every other one of my colleagues at the time, not requiring people to come in person for every single pretrial conference.
Okay. What is your opinion on pro se litigants? Do you think you can fairly adjudicate cases of pro se litigants? Or have you been doing that with pro se litigants?
I have been doing that in my time on the bench, and I did that in my time in practice as well. I was opposite pro se litigants. I do think that it's important for them. I thought this as a lawyer, and I think it as a judge. The parties have to have confidence in the outcome of the proceedings. They have to feel like they've been heard and they've been given a fair opportunity to tell their story and have a day in court, and that applies no less to a pro se litigant than to someone who's represented.
How would you hold peace officers to the same standard of law as the citizens?
The oath I took when I took the bench was to administer justice without regard to persons. That's without regard to race, creed, nationality, sex, etc. That's also without regard to profession. So I have not yet had a case where a law enforcement officer was charged with a crime in my courtroom, but they're entitled to the same constitutional protections as any other defendant. They're not entitled to any special treatment, pro or con. in my view, and they're entitled to meet charges against them, and the state is also entitled to present the evidence against that defendant, either at a jury trial or a bench trial.
So what do you perceive, or what have you been able to perceive as the greatest obstacle to justice in the division that you're working in now?
I think it's hard to single out any one thing because there's a lot of moving parts. And so I don't think that there's any magic answers or any simple answers. For my part, I can try to implement the philosophy I've outlined for you in every case and every day. I think sentencing laws that the General Assembly passes are incredibly important, and I'm sworn to follow them, and I take them seriously. I think that the prosecutor has tremendous discretion in terms of how they charge cases, in terms of how they plead cases, and I have considerably less to do with those items by definition. Also, I would throw into the mix that I think inertia is a big part of the problem, that there's a culture, that there's a way that justice is administered over time that's easy and comfortable for people. And, that's something I find myself fighting against already. And that's, one thing I ran in against with, the one change on the criminal justice docket, my criminal docket that we've talked about. I raised a lot of eyebrows not to bring defendants in here for every single pretrial, and because that's just a different way of doing things.
So what is your vision for the future of the judicial system here in Cleveland? And
well, I'm trying to...
Go on.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. I didn't...
I just mentioned Cuyahoga County, not just Cleveland, but Cuyahoga County, because you're common pleas judge. What's your vision?
Sure. Well, couple things I would say. One is I'm trying to lead by example in that regard. So I don't want to say that there's some aspirational future that lies out there that is, hopefully someday attainable if we can line the stars up the right way. I think it's the little things that you do every day in administering justice that gets you, the world is what you make it, in my view, and I think it's those little things you do every day that help get you there. And I think leading by example is really important. The other thing I would say is, we haven't talked about this yet, so I'll just place it on the table. When it comes to sentencing, I talked a little bit about financial sanctions and the like, but I do think it's very important to really try to meet people where they are at, impose a sentence that's just and fair, but also recognizes that not everybody needs to go to prison. That's in many ways, the bluntest instrument we have. It's appropriate in some cases, no question. In other cases, it's not. And when it's not, I've been trying to work with individual defendants to put them into situations where we can hopefully avoid that option and kind of create transform the situation, if you will, into something better for everybody. And so part of my vision for the future is where we continue to get better at that as a county and as a court.
So what changes would you advocate for and why?
Some of the things that I've been advocating for, they're generally items that flow from the philosophy I've outlined, and there's some things that I'm trying to do that I would call more administrative in nature or the like. Let's give you a couple examples. No secret before the pandemic, and one would assume it's still going to happen, that we are having a major project here at the Justice Center, and that's an important project for a whole lot of reasons. and I've made no secret about my views on that project. It would be one of the most expensive public works projects in the history of the state of Ohio if it went forward as proposed. We no question need to improve conditions in the jail as part of that project. That's something that I was involved in private practice before I took the bench. I was co-counsel with the NAACP, among others. James Hartman was my co-counsel in that case, where we were, filed a federal lawsuit over the conditions in the jail. So that's very important. We've got to fix that. That's got to be part of this project. But we can't have a project, in my view, that simply reinforces the status quo at the Justice Center, the way justice is administered in this county for the next 30 or 50 years. I think we have used the project to try to imagine where we want to go. And I think there's ways we can do that that are very positive, that involve shared resources and common spaces to make the experience better for everyone. We don't, in my view, need 34 courtrooms for 34 common pleas judges, for example, and that would result in significant cost savings, which would free up resources for the county and the criminal and civil justice systems to put into other items, which I think we all, as we watch the events of the day, have a long and growing wish list on.
If since you have been on the bench, how are you using your power of the bench to bring about important changes to the judicial system that disproportionately affects people of color?
Well, I think that's I think some of the practices that I've outlined disproportionately affect people of color to the extent that they are disproportionately the defendants in criminal justice in criminal cases. So, I think giving them the opportunity to tell their stories and to have a fair day in court disproportionately benefits them. I think trying to use the sentencing power not to impose harsh fines that perpetuate a cycle of poverty, things like that. I think those are the kinds of things. They benefit everyone. I think they're the right thing under the law, regardless of color, but I do think they fit the description you're asking about.
Judge Calabrese, thank you very much. We appreciate your being a part of our first Zoom telecast and
Well,
for our ratings and endorsement process. And God bless you.